Welcome everyone to Peace Corps student panel with University of West Florida alumni and some other Peace Corps alumni. My name is Randolph Scott. I'm Assistant Director of International Programs here at the University of West Florida. Thank you very much for joining us today. We're going to speak about the Peace Corps and whether that might be right for you as a University of West Florida student, and perhaps if the Peace Corps Prep program is a good idea for you. So we have a great lineup of speakers here today, people who have actually served with Peace Corps overseas and can speak to you about their experiences. It should be a really good conversation. Want to start with some introductions. I'm going to let the staff of the International Center, or the Office of International Affairs at the University of West Florida introduce themselves. We can start with Rachel, Karen, Jean, and Sarah.
Great, thanks, Randolph. My name is Rachel Hendricks, and I am the Director of the Office of International Affairs, and I'm also serving as the Peace Corps Prep Program Coordinator.
I'm Assistant Director of International Programs, and I work primarily with UWF students who are going to study abroad.
Hi everyone, my name is Jean DeSimon. I'm an International Student Advisor and the advisor for UWF Global Quarter. So if you're looking to connect with some of our international students, please let us know. We'd be happy to work that out for you.
Hi, I'm Sarah Brake. I am the program manager here for international programs, and I handle all of our behind the scenes processing for applications and documents.
All right, thank you everybody. And now I'd love to have the actual panelists tell us a little bit about themselves. And so maybe I'll start with Christopher Lenz, and then I can call out your name whenever it's your turn to speak here right at the beginning. If you all wouldn't mind just telling us where you served overseas and a little bit about who you are today, just really anything you'd like to share about your experience, and then we can go in a little bit more depth later on. Christopher Lenz is here, who is a representative of the Peace Corps.
Hi y'all, thanks for having me. And again, congratulations to UWF for being one of our newest Peace Corps prep schools and programs. Very exciting times. So yes, I am the regional recruiter. I cover all of North Florida and South Georgia. So I'm happy to work with students on their applications, review resumes, their motivation statements, help them find the right program at the right time in the right place. That's my 40-hour-a-week job, but 24/7, I am a returned Peace Corps volunteer. I served in Paraguay, as far from the beach as you get in South America, from 96 to 98. And then 15 years later, a second window in life opened up, and I served again as a health extension volunteer in Tanzania, East Africa, and that was 2014 to 2016. So thank y'all for having me.
All right, and Patricia Edmiston.
Yeah, I'm probably one of the earliest veterans. I joined in '62 and went to Cornell University for my training. And it was a time when they were doing most of the training within the country, except for 1 month of outward bound training in Puerto Rico. So the Cornell experience was 2 months. I had no idea of the kind of person who was going to join the Peace Corps, knew very little about it, except that I was an idealist and I cared about what happened to people who were less well off than I. And it just so happened that they were the greatest group of people. We started off with about 118 in our group and narrowed it down. They used the term deselected at that time to about 82 of us who left to Cornell. And we went down to Puerto Rico for something else. I think that's been deleted now, and that was what they called outward bound training. I think they were trying to test our ability to have stamina, to stick with a job, to get over our fears. This was when they were doing survival skills, overnights in the rainforest, and survival swimming, risking our lives in the Caribbean, wearing mechanics overalls, taking them off, blowing them up, using them as life preservers. And they did honey dipping, we did honey dipping. That was where you worked with the community We would visit the little houses in the interior of the island, very isolated one from the other, and we would take samples of fecal material from the outhouses to test for parasites. You may not have wanted to hear that, but we went around in teams and we worked in conjunction with the Puerto Rican Health Department. So that also tested our ability in Spanish. We had intensive language training at Cornell as well. The Spanish I had in high school and college served me well. Peru, I worked in the area of public health and primarily with malnourished children and undernourished mothers. A lot of first aid. Our medical clinic was on the banks of a riverbed that was dry most of the year, but during the rainy season, it flooded. People used the riverbed as a latrine when it was dry. And so there were the whole disease cycle had to be addressed, and that was a big part of my job, the public health. And it was a heart-wrenching job, one that you went home drained from at the end of the day. I had two wonderful women with whom I shared a small house, and anyway, it was an arduous time, but one that was unforgettable. It changed my life. It changed my career direction, and it was the experience that had the longest lasting and the most impactful influence on my life. It took me in the direction of international work eventually. And while I was at UWF, I was trained to do conflict resolution. I served in Brazil and Peru with the United Nations as a consultant to women's groups. And since then have done a lot of research in Peru and Nicaragua, Central America. I have written a number of books, many of them dealing with social justice. And toward the end of my career at UWF, I was able to secure the job that I really loved the most, and that was, in a way, what you're doing, Rachel. I'm just amazed at the growth of the programs now. One of the accomplishments that I enjoyed was to finally sign a memorandum of agreement with the University of Havana. And we were one of 8 in the country to have an exchange program. And I'm sure if you search through those old files, you might find that. But we had a couple of exchanges for faculty and students with the University of Havana. And there were sometimes objections from certain faculty members because of their historical background with Cuba and having left the country and as exiles. Anyway, it was quite a ride, and I did write a novel about it, The Morning of Angels, Mourning. And in one way or another, the Peace Corps has permanently changed my life, especially giving me a worldview that I didn't have before as a middle-class Catholic woman from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Thank you.
Patricia, that's absolutely amazing. I wanted to ask you, I cannot refrain from asking you, if you did the Peace Corps in 1962. For those who don't know, the Peace Corps was established as an initiative through the Kennedy administration.
Right.
And I believe that the first cohort, at least, of Peace Corps volunteers was actually able to meet President Kennedy.
They did.
You were able
61.
to?
No, that was 61, and I was not there. Yeah, and that group, I think, went to Ethiopia. Yeah, but his words, permanently changed me. And the interesting thing about it was idealism permeated our group. And we went in at a time when our social life consisted of sitting on the floor and singing folk music, if I had a hammer, that kind of music, and listening to, the volunteers would get out their guitars, and it was the quintessential experience of the 60s, except it wasn't the Woodstock. It was almost the the countervailing force to Woodstock, where you had all these idealistic, clean-cut young people. And the oldest, I think, in our group was 63. I was just 23, and I thought I was old then. We ranged in age from about 19, because the Peace Corps was taking younger students then, and also people with skills, plumbers and mechanics and electricians. And we all worked, most of us, in community development. That was the term at that time. And we had to really find our own niche. That was something, I think, that's very different from how the Peace Corps is operated now.
Yeah.
Go and we were promised certain areas that we would be able to exercise our degree programs. And I had trained as a speech therapist and audiologist. Well, I didn't do any of that. And you needed to find that. Otherwise, you went through this troublesome period of soul searching. Why am I here? Why am I wasting my time? And those people who could not find that, and you really had to take the initiative to find it yourself, were the most troubled, and some of those young people came back before finishing their 2 years.
Yeah. Well, we definitely want to speak about both the joys you can experience on the Peace Corps, but also the difficulties you can experience. And thank you so much, Patricia, for sharing some of your experience with us. We have some other volunteers. Chris Walters, would you be willing to tell us a little bit about your experience in the Peace Corps?
Sure. So hi, my name is Chris Walters. I was in the Peace Corps 2003 to 2005 in the country of Georgia. I'd recently graduated from UWF the previous spring. I was classmates with Ben Stubbs, if you guys know him. And yeah, it was transformative. I mean, I think I'm really excited about this program. I think UWF was absolutely instrumental in steering me towards Peace Corps one way or another. So I think it's a great fit for a university to have this program. And yeah, Peace Corps is definitely, I think, like Patricia said, it's a sort of a demarcation line in my life of there is before Peace Corps and there is after Peace Corps, both in the way that you view the world and experience it. And for me, Georgia was amazing. It's part of the former Soviet Union. It's a country that at the time had an economic collapse, had refugee crisis, recovering from war, all kinds, everything you can think of. A very beautiful place, a very meaningful, eventually, for my life. I actually went back and worked there after I came back from Peace Corps and went into grad school, and I never anticipated I would ever go back to Georgia, but I ended up getting a job with an international nonprofit there. My wife came over there, so we were there last summer, and we visited there with my kids. So it's been just a very meaningful place and experience, and just absolutely, it's something that, I think, like I said, with UWF, it guided me towards, I think I always had this idea that I wanted to do some kind of service. My father was in the military, and I wanted to do something where I served and represented our country in some way. And I think this fulfilled that role in an amazing way, and stop for now. So.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much, Chris. And I'll tell Ben you said hello. And moving on, I think we have a few more. Keith Hardy, would you mind sharing a little bit of your experience with us?
Sure, absolutely. Well, thanks so much for inviting me. This is really exciting. I'm really glad to see, this program start up at UWF. I think it's a tremendous resource for the students. So I'm really, really excited for all the work that you all are doing. So my name is Keith Hardy. I'm an alumnus of UWF, and actually, after my Peace Corps experience and after some other international experience, came back to UWF and worked in the international department with many of the wonderful folks that you see here. I was very motivated to join the Peace Corps, probably for similar reasons as Patricia and Chris have mentioned. I had a very idealistic streak in me. Like I really, really wanted to get out and see the world and to help others, and not only to help, but also to learn. Learning was a really big part of it for me, and for anyone who joins the Peace Corps. I really wanted to get out and learn more about another culture and live in another culture, not just visit, not just go on a vacation, but actually be part of that culture and do work there. So the application process, I understand, has changed quite a bit in the last few years. But when I was applying, you had a little bit less option of where you would choose to go or what program you would choose to do. So you could basically kind of put in a preference, and then they would kind of slot you in on what was available. And Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, but I understand that's changed quite a bit, where you can now kind of apply more directly to specific programs. But I really wanted to be in Latin America because I speak Spanish. And so I really wanted to be in Latin America, and wanted to work in either teaching English or community environmental conservation or a similar field. And so I ended up getting placed in Panama in community environmental conservation. And it was a very long process, and I'm happy to talk to students who are applying through the process, going through the process, because for me it was a very, very long process, going through all of the medical exams and very arduous paperwork to get into the Peace Corps, but it was all worth it. So I served from 2011 to 2013 in Panama as a community environmental conservation volunteer, and it was an extremely rewarding experience. I learned probably, like, I still feel like I'm learning from my Peace Corps experience, like so many years after. I'll meet someone from Panama or even another person who served in the Peace Corps and have a conversation, and they'll trigger something in me that I hadn't even considered before, from years ago. So I still feel like it's a constant learning process for me, both sharing my experiences, but also continuing to learn. But I had a couple of projects. So I had kind of like two different related focuses within environmental conservation. So I worked on a reforestation project, specifically within cattle farms. So in Panama, with the big economic boom that had been happening and is still happening, since the 90s and the 2000s, cattle was the really big economic engine in the rural part of the country. And because of that, a lot of folks were very eager to start cattle farms. And what they did was they would clear cut the forest, just kind of cut everything down and just start from scratch, just cut down all of the trees and plant grass for grazing. So in the short term, it can help someone earn a very large income relative to what they had prior in a very short amount of time, in just a few years. But it's not sustainable long term. So Panama had been dealing, and is frankly still dealing, with the effects of deforestation. And if you compare Panama to, for example, like neighboring Costa Rica, they took a very different development approach. Costa Rica does have some of that, but not nearly to the extent of Panama. So my project was in reforestation. So we had a lot of creative things that we did. I had a grant from the United Nations Development Program that I was able to administer. It was a multi-year project. So that was helpful. But we did things like living fences, where we would work with the cattle farmers to use trees that were actually nitrogen fixers as fences, as their posts, rather than just stakes, things like that, just kind of like small incremental changes, as well as practicing reforestation within riparian areas. So that means the areas around the rivers and creeks. So like in a lot of Central America, a lot of the tropics, you have a wet season and a dry season. So in the wet season, it would always flood. In the dry season, the creek would completely dry up because there were no trees to hold in the water, and that obviously caused problems for the cattle, but also problems for the folks living in the communities. So that was one part of my program. And then the other part of my program was education. So I was working in primarily in, you have what you're assigned to do, and then you have what you do. So I was working in an elementary school. But I really went all over, which was a lot of fun. That was, I mean, the community project, the reforestation, I think, it was great. Like I enjoyed it. It was fun working with adults, but like working with the kids was just like, I'm so glad I had that second component because it was such a stress relief. Like it was just so great to have that school environment. And we did all sorts of fun stuff. Like we did like little recycling relays where we would, pile up kind of like loads of trash and things on one side of the field, and then they would run and pick it up and go sort it, just like all sorts of little games like that. So we just did a lot of games that were and kind of like educational activities focused around conserving the environment. And so it gave the kids that experience as well as the experience of, having a Westerner in their community and exchanging those perspectives.
Sounds amazing.
So I had a great time.
Yeah, it sounds really cool. So is there anybody else on the call who's a return volunteer that I haven't? I don't want to forget anybody if you're here. We've got a lot of people on the call though. Please speak up if I have.
Dakota, Randolph.
Sorry, Karen?
Yeah.
Dakota, okay. Yeah, Dakota, would you mind telling us a little bit about your experience as a Peace Corps volunteer?
Sure. First of all, thanks for having me a part of the call. I appreciate that. And I'd like to echo what everyone else so far has said, that it's just fantastic that UWF has taken this step to encourage some of these students to take this step. I certainly don't speak for all return volunteers, but I think I do echo a lot of what I've heard so far from my fellow RPCVs, that this is a potentially life-changing experience for those who take this step. It is certainly by no means something for everyone. The right kind of person is going to make it what they want it to be. And I find that's been the experience for me so far. I picked up on what Keith just said there about how he still feels like he's learning from his Peace Corps experience years afterwards. I echo that. I feel the same way in a lot of different ways. So I started out in 2016 with Costa Rica. So I was actually a neighboring country to Keith, right there in Panama, and was there from 16 to last summer. Actually, this past June, I was there for a little over 3 years. First 2 years serving as a community economic development volunteer, and then I accepted an invitation to extend my service another year and change in a different position called a regional leader. The first 2 years were very unique, even within the Peace Corps sphere, in that I had to go through a site change due to some incidents that took place in my first site. But that actually, as I tell the story to others, that ended up being the best thing that could have happened for me. I say that because I got to see two different ends of the spectrum in my host country of Costa Rica. My first site was in a very rural community of around 800 or so people, and my second site was just outside the capital of San Jose in a much more urban setting. And so I got to see a lot of things differently in my second go around, if you will. And I feel like I got a fuller experience due to that shift, that change. My major projects included entrepreneurial development with a lot of times the single mothers and different youth members of the community. Probably my favorite experience overall as a volunteer would have been the course called Mujeres Emprendedoras, which means entrepreneurial women. It's a course put out by Junior Achievement through their department there in Costa Rica. It's a little 12-lesson course, but it's one of those things that gets into the very basics of what it is to start a business or to cultivate a business, and to see different. Thank you, Rachel. To see people go from an idea and have a seed that they want to plant, and then over the course of a 12-week class, see that idea take root and grow and blossom. And it was just the other day I was on Facebook and I saw one of the former participants, and she is now being recognized in a regional entrepreneurial group in her part of the country as a successful entrepreneur. And, you know, just to think back to the very humble beginnings of sitting in a dusty community salon and talking about the basics of what it is to sell an empanada. And now to see her having reached that level of success and this broad spectrum of clients, and just, that warms my heart. So that course, Women Entrepreneurship, was definitely one of my favorite parts. And then just to sum it up, like I said, I extended in a different role of regional leader, which is not a position, if I understand correctly, that is present in every single Peace Corps post. But I know it exists in a few of them. All that is it's not necessarily a supervisory role, but it's there to help kind of guide and encourage the number of volunteers in a specific region in a country from your experience as a volunteer, and to help them have success in their own ways. It was also a really good excuse for me to stick around Costa Rica, because if you know anything about it, you know how beautiful that place is. So all around, overall, an amazing experience that has been said before was more of a kind of a demarcation line. I think that's what Chris said, that definitely defined pre and post Peace Corps as far as Dakota's life goes. So looking forward to being a part of the call and answering any questions that we can.
Thanks, Dakota. I thought we'd ask another guiding question from some of our return volunteers about life after Peace Corps, and how you translate those skills and experience that you obtained while being a Peace Corps volunteer into the workplace, and how does it open up doors for you in terms of your career?
All right, to just jump in, or? I remember when I left, there weren't any special spots for returning volunteers like there are now. If you look at the Worldview magazine, which is the magazine that serving Peace Corps volunteers receive now, and return volunteers, there are so many opportunities for graduate school and financial help. Then there were not, and I had to follow the money. And fortunately, I had a wonderful master's program. I was able to get some help by teaching English to Venezuelan educators who were studying for their master's degree at the University of Wisconsin at Milwaukee. And that helped me, and I was able to get my master's then, eventually going on for my doctorate. And but all the time trying to get closer and closer career-wise to my deepest interest, and that was development work and linguistic acumen, and the work I did subsequently with women in Brazil and Peru. And that was so long ago. And I would just say that was like an ideal and an idea that was shaping my career goals, that had to be, I think, molded more carefully, because there were not the international opportunities that are there right now in terms of going on to medical school or environmental consulting, public health, for example, those other avenues. So right now, the opportunities are just prolific, a myriad opportunities for returning volunteers in terms of assistantships at universities all over the country.
So for me, it was definitely, it was a, an almost necessity for where I went right after Peace Corps. For a little while, I was waiting to apply to grad school, but I went to Columbia University and I studied international educational development. So that certainly had a hand in helping me to get in there. And then after that, I went and worked for an international nonprofit in DC, working on exchange programs. And then a job opportunity, like I said, opened up to go back to Georgia to run the country office there. And without that Peace Corps experience, without the language skills, without understanding the culture, and it was very nuanced position where you had to work with a lot of different ethnic groups and some breakaway republics next to the country, and things that you just had to have the nuances of understanding what was happening in the country. And so without those skills, without the Peace Corps, I think that's one amazing thing about Peace Corps, is that it gives you that such a deep understanding of a people and a place and a culture that you would never get otherwise. So I think without having those, maybe I would have still had a chance for the job, but it certainly made the job much better than it ever would have been without those skills. So it's absolutely was wonderful for that. Now I'm not in international work, and I live in Corning, New York, so a little bit down the road from Cornell. And I run grant programs and a gallery for Regional Arts Council. But it's amazing. Everyone's saying Peace Corps is still, you learn from it. I mean, Peace Corps is still like daily a part of even my job, and especially with COVID and understanding how to think out of the box, how to address this as a humanitarian crisis and act accordingly and act swiftly. And the job I have now, I think Peace Corps was absolutely key to that, and seeing what we could do quickly within my job. So definitely Peace Corps has far-reaching, lasting implications for, I think, whether it's a post-career right afterwards or further down the line.
Thank you. Anyone else? Keith or Dakota? Of course, we know how Chris translated it.
I think everything that Patricia said and Chris as well is certainly pretty much spot on. I think back, it seems like my Peace Corps experience is a little more recent than some other RPCVs here, but I think back and I distinctly remember towards the end of service, even though I already decided to extend, back then as a normal volunteer, there was so much correspondence about like assisting us as individuals getting back into the US, getting back into society, and so many different resources that were made available to us to either continue our education, find links for jobs, tips and tricks and links for networking, so many different ways that were made available to us. For myself, I wasn't ready to leave. I was very interested in the regional leader position. And so I ended up sticking around, made the most of that. And since then, I've gone back a few times, had some very productive, interesting conversations with members of the staff on the ground in Costa Rica. And so a different avenue, I guess I would say, is that I'm looking to go back there for what's called a response position, which is a whole different application process, to kind of get my feet a little more into the Peace Corps pool, with the end in mind to maybe one day find myself with a full-time position within Peace Corps. So instead of using the Peace Corps experience to go in a different direction, kind of go right along that path and see where that leads me.
Could I just comment on what you just said? Is this part of the crisis corps that the Peace Corps has developed, where you go into areas that are having floods or disasters, or after a conflict with another nation, and you go in for a shorter term and you do crisis work? Is that what you're talking about?
I don't know it as Crisis Corps. It's called Peace Corps Response, and it is a shorter term assignment.
I think it's the same thing. No.
Okay.
I think they changed the name.
Okay. This is what the job description of the post that I've applied for. I would not consider it anything to do with a crisis per se, as much as it is just further development and more of a focused field. But it sounds like it's along the same lines.
Along the same lines.
Mm-hmm.
Do you belong to the National Peace Corps Association?
I think I do. I should know the answer to that question. I think that I do.
It is just such a great resource. And they have this would be something students would really enjoy. And I think it's online for the first time this month. It's simply called Worldview, and it is the magazine of the National Peace Corps Association. It is just a wonderful publication that deals with all of the issues. And of course, most recently, you're familiar with the drawdown, the evacuation of some 7,000 volunteers just about simultaneously, the planning that went into that because of the COVID threat. Internationally, a lot of people did not think that was the wisest idea, and volunteers were left, oh my gosh, I can't leave my work, I can't leave my assignments. And many of them couldn't say goodbye to the people with whom they worked, and were just uprooted, and within 2 days might have disappeared from their communities. So you can imagine how devastating that was for them personally. Now they're starting back up again, assigning volunteers to the Caribbean, I believe, in early 2021 and in other places. So I'm just really happy. It was a time when the Peace Corps really was vulnerable politically, and who would have thought that they could now resurrect as they're doing. So something to think about.
And one other thing, Rachel, I was going to mention is that there's a lot of really there's so many different paths you can take to transition out of the Peace Corps, but one of them is definitely like transitioning into policy work. So a lot of folks, a lot of returned Peace Corps volunteers transition into either like the State Department, or they work for international organizations. And I really just believe that the on the ground experience that you get in the Peace Corps is so incredibly unique. And it's just an incredible complement to any, formal academic education that you can get in whether an undergrad or in a master's program. So a lot of folks will apply directly to like the State Department, or to other international organizations, whether it's in policy or working in development. So those are definitely options. My path was, when I came back, teaching English was not my main focus in the Peace Corps. It was more of like a side project that I did. But then it was something that I really, really enjoyed. And so when I left the Peace Corps, I did that. I went back to UWF and taught at the intensive English program. And I went to South Korea and taught there for a year. And then after that, I transitioned into working in politics. So there's just so many ways that you can go with your experience.
I love hearing about how Peace Corps has affected all of you in your careers, or how you expect it to affect you in your career moving forward, but also how it's affected you personally and changed you personally since you've had the experience. But I also want to ask you all about, sort of who you were before you did Peace Corps, and what kind of person succeeds in Peace Corps. Peace Corps is hard. It's no joke. It's not just a walk in the park. And I'm really curious to hear you all tell some of the students who are going to be watching this, who are considering Peace Corps, what kind of person succeeds in Peace Corps? What kind of personality succeeds in Peace Corps? What kind of skill sets is it really helpful to bring into an experience that can be so intense? And I think I'll throw this to Christopher Lenz first, since he's a Peace Corps representative and has probably answered that question many times.
So first of all, I just wanted to thank all the return volunteers for their service with Peace Corps, but especially Patricia. I think everyone who served after you, even the entire agency, we all stand on your shoulders of those original volunteers from 61 and 62. And I could just hear your stories forever, and I just get such a strong sense of how much that service in Peru meant to you, even 50-something, 60 years later. So anyway, I want to throw that out.
Thank you so much. You're absolutely right.
Right. Peace Corps, it's definitely hard. It's a unique experience to live in a country and a culture and a language that you might never have even heard of or thought about. And I think the most important thing is just your willingness to go outside your front door and be part of that community, right? They don't speak your language. They might not look like you. They might not worship like you, but people are people, right? And that's the most important thing about Peace Corps, is that we are invited by these countries and these communities to go work on projects, but also just to be part of that community. So just the idea of spending time with your neighbors, hanging out with the little kids, hanging out with the old people, everyone in between. And you will have so many ample time, to work on projects at the schools or with the Women's Artisan Cooperative, or doing agroforestry products, teaching, soccer teams, but just living that life. And you're just so invited, and they become as attached to you as you become attached to them. You also definitely need to have a sense of humor, because you are entertainment for your neighbors for 2 years. everything you do somehow is just hilarious to them. You might do the exact same thing they're doing the exact same way, but somehow it's just funny to them and stuff. So, yeah, I mean, that's, part of my two different experiences was, again, just being part of that community. And I was lucky enough to have the chance to return to Paraguay 8 years after I had left. And that was pre-cell phone, emails. They had no idea I was showing back up, and just being able to go back into my community the same way I left, which was dirty and sweaty and muddy. I had borrowed a bicycle from the Peace Corps office and just rolled in unannounced and spent 2 weeks with folks I hadn't seen for 8 years. And just, I mean, I cried, they cried. I might start crying now. So I'll let the other return volunteers kind of talk about what sort of person it takes to be a Peace Corps volunteer.
I went back in 1966 with the experiment in international living. I took a group of high school juniors and seniors down there, and hadn't visited my community for 2 years. And they threw a party, and in one of the little houses, dirt floor, always swept clean, and reed walls with newspapers in between the cracks, and the same glass of Pisco went around the entire room, and you sip from the communal cup. And it was so emotional. It was an incredible experience for me. And I still correspond with the Peruvians that I lived with and worked with there. They'll always be a part of my heart. I fell in love. The guy turned out to be married, so that ended. So be very careful. The Peruvian men, Latino men, can be absolutely charming and sweep you off your feet. And they know the most wonderful piropos. If you don't know what a piropo is, it's the sweet things and sometimes not so sweet things that men may say to you as a woman is walking down the street. And anyway, just had some really interesting ones. But yes, I would say this, one real big way that it was so different back in the early 60s is that we had no telephones, we had no computers, no smartphones, and so it was all letter writing. And we just looked forward to the mail. You'd go to your post office box, and it was a general one, so all the volunteers' letters went into the same. And any packages would go through customs and the regular mail. And I remember getting word that my mother was thought to have cancer, and I was just desperate to talk with her. The only way I could reach her was through a ham radio operator in that city. So that's how we made contact, and that's a huge difference. So you've got to have people who are resilient and persistent and can deal with culture shock and missing the life you had, especially in those early months, to transcend the difficulty and being away and everything new and not having water and not having refrigeration, and maybe having a latrine in your backyard where there's a wild turkey feeding for the family and you've got to swat it away with a broom. I mean, there are some funny stories. And then you get sick, for crying out loud. You've got to be able to pull yourself back together. You get sick. So not to scare anyone away, you get over it, but it can be a rough ride sometimes.
So for me, I think in terms of how I would change before and after, I think I was certainly much more idealist going into Peace Corps than I was coming out. I don't know if it was a little bit of being naive about the world. I'd never been outside the country except to go on a cruise to the Bahamas and go to Vancouver. So it was my first time passport, first time out of the country. And I think especially going to a place that was part of the former Soviet Union and discovering that what I knew in textbooks was such a black and white version of the world, and to really discover the gray that's out there, I think was very illuminating. Especially, I feel like you learn more about yourself and about your own country than maybe you do as actually the country you're placed in. So I think understanding, who you are, but also, I think for me, it was profound understanding that like this blue passport that I held, that was this unearned privilege of a place that I was born compared to other people for what, you know, they had endured and stuff. I think it does affect you, I think, and it does change your outlook, I think, a little bit on life. In terms of, I think, what made some people successful, I mean, my group, I was the third group of volunteers. We started with 32, we finished with 16. And I think that, you know, the being able to let things go, being able to go with the flow of things. I mean, just accepting that you have no control over anything, and you may have wanted to go and work on some kind of language skill, but your neighbor just dragged you in their car and they didn't tell you where you're going to go, and you ended up 3 hours later in a mountain town drinking homemade vodka for a weekend, and you're okay, all right. And so I mean, I think just having that acceptance of that you're there as a guest of the country, and I think willingness to take that as far as it will go, and to have respect, I think, for the country, and to not have unrealistic expectations. And I think, you know, I think a thing that maybe set people apart that maybe did leave or did stay, you know, when people got jaded or they got feelings that, you know, the country was out to get them, or there was, you know, was something that was personal against them, I think that's when you stop succeeding, and you really have to separate yourself and your ego from being, I think, a Peace Corps volunteer. So.
There was a really key word that was mentioned in the question. I think it was personality. A lot of the volunteers that I went in with are classic extroverts, people that find themselves naturally outgoing, and no matter what environment they're in, they're always going to be engaging in one or more people about any number of topics. And I'm not that person. I am a classic introvert, and there were only a few of us in our group. I think I went in with a total of 37, and we finished with 35, which was an amazing stat. But out of all of the 37 I went in with, I think there were probably 2 or 3 of us total that identified as introverts. And yet I found myself in sight, when I finally got to my community after training, I found myself still able to reach out, still able to take part, as it was mentioned a moment ago, to like leave your front door, to go out into the community and basically say yes to invitations that if I were back here in the States, I'd probably at least think twice about, because of my own personality, if you will. There was a study at some point recently that said that your personality tends to change depending on the language that you're speaking. And I remember the first time I heard that before Peace Corps service, I thought that there's no way that's true. It's just the words coming out of your mouth. There's no way that can be a thing. And yet I found myself, when I was speaking Spanish with the people in my community, with my counterparts and my project partners, over time, I began to look back and I realized that there's actually some truth in that. So I say this as a bit of a hopeful message to any introverts who are thinking about like, oh my gosh, how am I going to go live in a whole different part of the world and learn a whole different language and stuff. Learning that language might actually help you get out of your shell, out of your comfort zone, and even might help you become a more successful volunteer in that dynamic.
That's a great point. Thanks, Dakota. I know we're running close to our 1 hour time, and I know we do have a couple of guests that have joined, so I want to make sure that I open it up to any questions that they may have. And if not, then we'll just kind of conclude with some final thoughts. Like if you were trying to encourage someone who maybe was on the fence about joining the Peace Corps prep program or joining the Peace Corps, maybe we can wrap it up with that. But any other questions? And feel free to add them in the chat box if you don't have the capability to use your mic. All right, well, seeing none, let's just go ahead and we'll go around again and kind of put the nice bow on this package for everyone. Do you want to start, Patricia, and just kind of give us your final thoughts?
It's the hardest job, the greatest job you'll ever have.
Thank you. What about Chris Walters?
I would just say that if you're thinking about going in, you know, I'm not sure what year you are at UWF, but take full advantage of everything UWF has to offer. You know, I was really, truly being a part of the UWF community and being able to be involved in student affairs or even intramurals or other things on campus, and getting a sense of being part of something greater than yourself, and understanding what that means. And I was an interdisciplinary humanity major, so I had classes from all over the place, but just I think being okay with being, having this holistic background that UWF can give you, I think can prepare you very well for going in the Peace Corps.
Thank you. Keith?
Yeah, so just like a couple of words of advice, definitely prepare as much as you can. Learn a language, learn as much language as you possibly can. Learn a trade if you can, whether it's plumbing, whether it's woodworking. I mean, there's just so many things that can transfer. Get as much outdoor experience as you can. Like if you want to work in like community environmental conservation, like even work like doing things like working in a plant nursery, volunteering, things like that. Prepare as much as you can, but then also just let go of perfectionism. Like you're never going to be perfect. And when you get to your host country, you're going to realize that things are so different than like anything that you could have possibly imagined. So just don't be a perfectionist. Prepare as much as you can, and then have grit, determination, perseverance. Those are the qualities that I think are the most important. You have to just really, really want it and really be able to go with the flow. And just let go of being perfect, and take it as a learning opportunity, and just do it. Just go do it. If you want to do it, just go do it. Just take the next step and keep taking the next step after that. Thank you.
And knowing you, Keith, not being perfect that's a definite hardship for you. How about Dakota?
Yeah, I like what I've heard so far, and one thing I want to add to it, I guess, is before I went in, I did not understand the importance and the weight of the second and third goals. So everybody knows the first goal of Peace Corps is to go and train up a generation, a group of nationals to be able to take on whatever your sector is focused on. But then the second and third goals are just as important, if not even more so, as far as the overall mission of the Peace Corps, and that is that number two, that you are to learn about the country in which you're serving, and then number three is that you're supposed to share your own culture, the U.S. broadly, and then your regional culture, if you will, with the locals, and let them learn some about that. I can tell you from experience, and I'm sure that our PCVs on the panel would also echo, that during Peace Corps you have at least the opportunity to make relationships and friendships that will last the rest of your life. People you can stay in touch with, not just in your cohort, but the host country nationals that will not become so much more than friends. They'll become your family. And then I just want to emphasize what Keith said, like, if you're going to do it, do it. Make your decision, think about it, weigh all the options, consider how it's going to change your life. But the moment you decide to do it, go 100% into it, head on into it, and let that be exactly what it is that you make it.
Thanks, Dakota, and thanks for sharing those goals too. And now, thanks to Chris Lenz, we also know the fourth goal is finding love, right? So, and maybe Chris, you can finish up and wrap it up with what you've walked away having served 2 terms with the Peace Corps and also working for the Peace Corps. What advice would you give?
Well, I'm definitely looking forward to serving a 3rd time, maybe when I'm a retiree and, with a partner, right? In terms of next steps, I think the most important thing people can do who are thinking about Peace Corps is just listen to returned Peace Corps volunteers. I mean, even just tonight, hearing stories from Peru and Panama, Georgia, and Costa Rica. I mean, it's just one of my favorite parts of my job is that I get to connect with other folks and just hear about their experiences, not even just what they did in service, but how that service translated into either graduate school or career paths that they might not even have thought about, how the Peace Corps service is transformative. So there are 1,200 different links to stories on our Peace Corps website. There are 230,000 people who have served in 60 years. That's 230,000 stories that people who are interested can explore. Right. Another next step is the Peace Corps Prep program at UWF. It will definitely make you a much more competitive applicant. It will give you a much just broader sense of what Peace Corps volunteers do. And sort of what Chris was also saying, the idea, I mean, the true beauty of Peace Corps is that you will do 10,000 different things, right? You do have a primary project, but you're in that community for 2 years, and you're going to work on so many different things that you might not ever have thought you were even capable of doing. So again, the idea of just opening up your heart, opening up your mind to that experience, like Keith was saying, just put yourself completely in there. United States is wonderful. It will be here when you get back.
Thank you. And I think I saw you drinking tereré there, Chris. So I know that's a common drink in Paraguay. So everything that you do comes back with you, right? All of these things change who you are once you return to the US. Well, I want to thank everyone for your time today. I really hope to see this Peace Corps Prep program grow. I hope that we get a number of applicants in this first application period that we have. They'll be open through January 15th. And I know that Chris Lenz is going to be available for any questions that that you may have, and perhaps some of our volunteers as well. But I want to thank you again for your time and for your service.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Great. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.